Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier. You know, in sport, momentum can be so important. If you have momentum, you're likely to win. And if you don't have it, it's so hard to wrestle it back. Well, if you look at the Volstead Act, the Prohibition Act, you'll see momentum begins clearly with the prohibitionists, the so-called dries. But prohibition was not a success, and the momentum changed remarkably. It was now with the movement against prohibition, the wets. In this way, prohibition, if I can move away from sport, was like a roller coaster ride. So let's look at that ride. This presentation will consider when the momentum drove the Prohibition Act. I'll do another presentation to consider when the momentum swung back to the anti-prohibitionists. So, where did the momentum for the wets come from? Temperance, that's abstaining from drinking alcohol, had a long tradition in America. Its roots lay in the different religious groups, which believed that alcohol was behind the decline in moral standards as a result of drunkenness. And the churches had strong organizational frameworks, which helped the cause. It was also a reaction to what rural America regarded as the immorality of life in the cities. And in southern states, there was a racial dimension. The vote and alcohol were seen as the two things that had led African Americans to stand up for themselves. But two pressure groups in particular added weight to the cause to ban alcohol. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was formed in 1873, and women got the vote in 1920, and the Anti-Saloon League, which was formed in 1893. Both campaigned in the states of the South and Midwest to have alcohol banned. They supported dry candidates in elections, ran campaigns in newspapers and magazines, as well as producing literature, pamphlets, cartoons, even books, highlighting the evils of alcohol and criticizing their opponents. The arguments for prohibition were based on both moral and economic grounds, and sometimes these crossed over. Thus, alcohol was blamed for most pauperism, most crime, even most insanity. It was blamed for wrecking home life, for corrupting young people, whilst employers were of the opinion that it made workers inefficient and contributed to absenteeism. And the prohibitionists were indeed very well organised, and prohibition became a significant issue in elections, with dries versus wets. And anyone standing for election knew they would be asked where they stood on the matter. The wets, however, were slow to see the danger and were poorly organised, and by 1916 there were a large number of dries in Congress, whilst almost half of America's states had already banned alcohol. By 1916, the sale of alcohol had been banned in 21 states, almost half of the total number of states, and nearly 3/4 of all Americans were living in dry states, or parts of states that were dry. This meant that the push for a national ban could be proposed. So it was that the 18th Amendment prohibiting alcohol was written into the American Constitution in 1919, coming into force on January the 16th, 1920. It was now illegal to make, transport or sell alcohol. An important thing to note is that the Prohibition Act or Volstead Act did not make consuming alcohol illegal, though some states did. It only made the manufacture, sale and transportation of alcohol illegal. And as things turned out, millions of Americans still wanted a drink. Bootleggers smuggled alcohol into the country, while at the same time illegal moonshine stills making whiskey became a part of life in out-of-the-way places. In the cities, the speakeasy, a basement bar behind locked doors that had peepholes drilled into it, became another part of life. Indeed, there were soon more illegal speakeasies than there had been pre-1919 legal saloons. And the age of the gangster began. There had been organised criminal gangs before Prohibition, but now they seemed to become almost institutionalised and romanticised, part of the image people held of American society. They were, of course, attracted by the huge profits to be made. Prohibition had created crime. Two particularly worrying legacies resulted from Prohibition and the organised crime that resulted from it. The first was that organised crime spread its net into other rackets, more comprehensively than had been the case before, notably protection, threatening to smash up shops and small businesses if protection money wasn't given, and gambling and prostitution too. The other factor was that it brought corruption not only into policing but into the judiciary and up into the local, state and even federal governments. In Chicago, Al Capone systematically corrupted virtually the entire city, policemen, judges, officials and politicians. Bribes or blackmail were the usual methods, but beatings and even murder were other options. Corruption went all the way to Washington, with some of President Harding's advisors involved. And public opinion did turn against Prohibition and the crime, or at least the violent crime it created in its wake. America seemed to be lawless. The police had been corrupted, and the gangsters had become very rich. There had always been people against Prohibition, but they had been slow to see the power of the movement in favour of it. Millions of Americans liked to drink, including, as you can see on this slide, women. It didn't affect their work or their home life, and as far as they were concerned, they had been deprived of an innocent habit. But there was also a growing number of powerful groups who began to raise their voice against the act. So, a useful presentation for you, I hope. If you find my presentations useful, please do recommend them to your friends. Make me feel wanted, and sign up to my YouTube channel. But for now, let me thank you for listening and wish you luck in your studies, whatever stage you are at as you listen to this presentation. Cheers.